So hello, my name is Kevin Griffin, and I'm a member of ACM SIGGRAPH's Diversity and Inclusion Committee that's chaired by Tony Bayless. And on behalf of the entire ACM SIGGRAPH organization, I would like to welcome you to the first day of the Diversity and Inclusion Summit. The summit will consist of 2 days of panels, talks, and fireside chats covering topics at the intersection of computer graphics, interactive techniques, and diversity and inclusion. The summit will be followed by the main conference starting on Monday, August 24th to Friday, August 28th. Not only will you have a front row seat to the most transformative advancements in computer graphics, but you will also be able to see and interact with some of the latest technologies and research from our industry partners. So if you haven't registered, please do so, and I promise you, you won't be disappointed. So um, today, I have the honor of moderating a very distinguished panel. This panel consists of an accomplished bioinformatics researcher, a talented visual effects and animation professional, an expert in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and an Oscar winning director. So, we will discuss some of the recent events surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, the current pandemic, and how SIGGRAPH can help in the education and awareness of the broader community. But before I get into all of that, I want you to meet this amazing panel, starting with Micaiah Brown. So, Micaiah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. So thanks. I just want to introduce myself. So I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor. I own a firm where I provide diversity strategy and training solutions to companies in the entertainment, sports, and tech industries. And through my firm, I also offer career coaching and resume prep services to women, military veterans, and their families. Also, for the past 2 years, I've been a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader at Activision, the leading worldwide developer, publisher, and distributor of interactive entertainment and leisure products for various consoles, handheld platforms, and PCs. And I've been very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion because I actually started my career as a Series 7 licensed financial advisor at American Express many years ago, during a time where there were not many women or highly what I consider melanated people who were stockbrokers. And so, despite that, I've always been successful and able to reinvent myself. So, after getting my MBA, I went from being a financial advisor to a pension consultant, advising some of the largest state pension funds in the country. And even in that industry, I experienced being one of a few Black women, which eventually sparked my interest in looking at what prevents many underrepresented people from obtaining high paid roles in those industries. And so I'm really happy to be here talking with this audience today. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Micaiah. Great background and introduction. Next, we're going to go to a colleague of mine, Dr. Jonathan Allen. He works at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Jonathan, how are you doing this morning?
Good morning. Doing great. Thanks. Can you hear me
We
okay?
can't hear you, Jonathan. Think you're on mute.
Uh,
Still can't hear you.
testing.
Are you muted, Jonathan? Oh, you can hear him, Adam.
Can you hear
Okay,
me?
you can continue, Jonathan. I think folks can hear you. I just can't hear you.
Can other people hear me?
Okay, you're good, Jonathan.
Oh, okay. What would be a virtual meeting without a few muting problems? I guess here. But just to introduce myself, I'm a bioinformatics researcher at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I've been at the lab for the last 13 years. Came there as a postdoc after doing my PhD in computer science. And my area of research right now is in computational drug discovery. And I've been in that area for the past 5 or 6 years, but my real kind of focus is just on developing computational methods for analyzing biological data. And I work with a talented team of researchers at the lab in trying to develop new technologies and new tools around drug development and pathogen characterization and detection. I'm excited to be here because I don't usually talk about other topics besides my area of research, but I think this is, an area that I'm really uh, interested to get involved with because of my sort of personal experience of always only being, say, the only Black person in my field, in my personal area of where I'm working, and really trying to understand how do we change that, and how do we bring more people into the sciences, and how do we diversify the science area and open it up to a broader community of people.
Okay. So I couldn't hear you, Jonathan, but I'm assuming you're done.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna move on to Bilali Mack. How are you doing today, Bilali?
I just want to make sure. Yeah?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm honored to be here. Yeah, so I guess for everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Bilali Mack, and I'm a visual effects supervisor at Alchemy X. I've been doing visual effects now for the better part of almost of a decade. Yeah, and I've been part of SIGGRAPH and the computer graphics community for probably 7 to 8 years. I'm really excited to be here to talk about the intersection of diversity and inclusion in the world of visual effects, animation, and storytelling, which I think is one of the most important parts that people sometimes leave out in computer graphics and visual effects, is that at the core of it is storytelling. And it's really important that we allow diverse stories to be told, because those are the ways that we can paint the perceptions of how people of color are seen and how Black and brown people are able to be perceived in the world we live in. Yeah.
I totally agree. But thanks for being here. It's an honor to moderate such a distinguished panel, as I mentioned earlier. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah.
So last but not least, we have our Oscar-winning director who co-directed one of my favorite animated shorts called Hair Love. So Mr. Everett Downing, take it away.
How you doing? Name's Everett Downing. I've been in the animation industry, mostly on the feature side, for almost, I think it's a little over 20 years now. So I'm kind of old school. First movie I ever worked on was Ice Age, the original Ice Age, over at Blue Sky Studios. But in my career, I've managed to work at Blue Sky, Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony Animation, and just recently I made the transition over to Netflix Animation. I've been, for the last year, I've been in development on an original series. This is a topic, that's very important to me, obviously. Very early in my career, I did feel like I was kind of like the Black unicorn. I was the only one out there, very, very unique. So I'm just really concentrated on trying to alleviate that and get more Black voices out there, and so we can share some of our unique experiences, because I just have this deep-seated belief that that when we share our stories, it kind of brings us all closer together. So
okay. For some reason, every other person I can't hear. So since your lips stopped moving, I'm assuming you stopped talking.
You guys can't hear me?
So thank you, for that introduction. What I'm gonna do now is jump into the questions. We have some of our wonderful student volunteers that will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, definitely send them there, and they will respond after kind of our initial pass through. So this first question is for Micaiah. The murder of George Floyd has become an inflection point for the Black Lives Matter movement and discussions on racial injustice, similar to how the assault on civil rights marchers in Selma, Alabama became an inflection point for the civil rights movement. What are your thoughts on what has transpired since George Floyd's murder on May 25th?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say, for people who are not aware, the murder of George Floyd is, this is something that has been happening for a number of years. This is not something that's new. And I see this as a pivotal moment in our history, one that I hope, number one, that educational history book writers will take note of and include in public and private school history curriculum, because there's so much that, growing up, particularly in this country, we're not taught in our schools. We learn about George Washington, we learn about Civil War, but we need to learn more about Black people and Black communities other than just slavery and that Dr. Martin Luther King had a dream. And so I'm really proud of the fact that there are people from all socioeconomic backgrounds who are out in the streets demonstrating. And there are people who are, really letting the world know that, the 300 plus years of lynching, murders, discrimination in housing, education, careers, and other institutional barriers to Black success are not going to be tolerated anymore. And so I'm just really proud. It's unfortunate that, George Floyd lost his life and many other people have lost their lives for us to get to this point. But I think that the fact that, we're in a situation where people are at home, they're more likely to watch the news because of COVID and quarantine in many cities and countries. That has brought together an opportunity for more exposure to what has been happening in the African American community and other communities of color for a number of years. And so, it's unfortunate that these things happen, that people have to lose their lives. But I'm also very happy that more people are realizing that this has been happening and they are getting behind the community and want to go out in the streets and demonstrate because, I think we all want to contribute to society. We all want a strong economy. We all want education. We all want to be able to provide for our families. And so collectively we can do that and be more productive. And we can do that if we all have access to opportunities. And right now we don't. And so I'm just really proud to know that there are people who are stepping up to be allies to the African American community to help us fight this fight.
I couldn't agree more. I was very appreciative and overwhelmed when colleagues at Lawrence Livermore reached out to me to understand how to become allies and what they can do to kind of push, this notion of racial justice forward. So I totally agree. Any of the other panelists have any comments on this?
I mean, yeah, that was really well spoken.
Yeah, I agreed with what was just said. The one thing that just strikes me is one thing that when I was thinking about this panel today, one thing that struck me that I heard this last week was when I heard Eric Garner's mother say, that there was an uprising in 2014, and we kind of have to figure out, and things kind of settled down, and we have to kind of think about how do we make sure that things don't settle down this time, that we can keep this momentum going. I do agree that this is something different, because of the more greater support, but we have to kind of figure out how we keep this momentum going forward, I think, and not let it settle down.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, for me, I think one of the things that I wouldn't say is like frustrating, but one of the things that has been, I would say, for the Black community, I think, is that it does sometimes feel a little bittersweet when it takes a moment like this for people to start really feeling like, oh man, like Black people are out in the streets getting killed. I didn't realize there was this much oppression. It's great. I think that people are doing a lot of research and finding these things out now. But for Black people in America, I feel like you have to understand that we can't just ignore the things that are happening to us. Other people can, like, we can't turn our Blackness off. Other people cannot have to deal with these issues in their lives if you're a white person or you're not particularly affected by the circumstances of systemic oppression in America. But these things have happened for so long. And one of the things that I think is really frustrating is the fact that the education of the story of slavery and the situation of Black people in America has basically been taught to us as like bullet points. In my mind, I feel like when kids are going through school, you learn about slavery, you learn about the Emancipation Proclamation, and then all of a sudden you jump from that to Martin Luther King. Everybody's wearing suits and walking around and marching, and you're like, oh my God, all of a sudden they got suits and they were all about civil disobedience. And then they got the Civil Rights Act passed, and this is where you got, Bilali. Now everything's equal. It's like a whole gap in between of terrible things that happen, like lynchings, antebellum South, Jim Crow, that gets skipped over while you're in school. And I feel like it's honestly, it's a disgrace to American history, you know, because Black history is American history. And the thing that I feel like a lot of people forget is that Black people have always been the champions of democracy in America because we've had to champion democracy. It's the only thing we could hold on to. If not, then there would be no hope. We had to live up to the words that were written in the Constitution because the people that wrote it, it was inherently created for them to be able to do everything they want. But we have to, as people of color, hold America and the United States to those words that they've been preaching forever, which they haven't always acted on as, you know, the way they've written it in the Constitution. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's been very interesting for me is how much of a clarion call or just like a moment the George Floyd incident was, because I realized myself like how much just my kind of inactivity made me complicit to the whole system. You know,
Yeah.
I've been someone who's kind of moving through my career and my lifetime in a way that I was really trying to make people feel comfortable around me, and like, you know, like I'm diminishing conversations because I don't want people to feel at a loss. And then when you see what happened with George Floyd, and you realize how flagrant it was flagrant, and you just realize like, okay, so it doesn't matter how small I'm going to make myself, how comfortable I'm going to make it. I'm actually making it easier for us to all in America just continue in this fashion. You know, and at that point I decided I can't do this anymore. Like this, like I have to have these hard conversations. You know, when people say like, well, you know, is racism even a thing? A few years ago, I was like, well, you know, I might let that conversation go, but I can't do that anymore. It's like I feel like I have to kind of be on point and educate people and let them know, like, no, this is something that's really important. And the great thing that's come out of this is kind of the first time where I feel that I'm actually seeing people who are responding to that. So I find that encouraging, but I still feel there's lots of work to be done.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm still having technical issues. I can only hear Micaiah and Bilali. So I'm a little upset that I'm missing some of that great dialogue. But we're gonna get to the next question. And Bilali, I would like you to start this off. And some of our panelists kind of alluded to this in their comments. But you know, one of the things that has surprised me as we're having this global dialogue on racial and ethnic injustice is just how unaware a lot of people are. We talked about, you know, the skipping of the lessons in school and all of that good stuff. But also the microaggressions and biases that a lot of us, being the only Black face at work, are facing, right? So what changes do you think are needed to ensure that we are teaching and exposing people to our true history? So you know, one of the important factors of that is so that we don't make these mistakes again, right? So what are your thoughts about, you know, how do we expose the true history so we're not making these mistakes in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think on exposing the true history, I think honestly, it's very difficult because that's like, I feel like it's almost bigger than just in a workplace thing. It's almost like a societal thing because I can go into my workplace, especially as a person of color, and talk about these things that I know that are true in American history that a lot of people probably either don't learn as much or try to brush over this information. And I'll speak to it fervently because I like I said before, I can't avoid being a Black person in America, right? I can't avoid being oppressed by the system that I live in because of the color of my skin. And so me going into a workplace and talking about it when it's not really felt by everybody in the office, it's kind of just like me kind of crying wolf a little bit. And for me, I feel like I feel like a lot of Black people, like we've spoken about before, feel like in the workplace, you kind of just want to get along because honestly, there's a fear of being that like aggro Black person in your company. And there's a real threat that people might think, oh, you're like the confrontational Black person, or they'll use HR terms like hard to get along with or difficult to work with, you know, and you might be talking about things that are like microaggressions, you know, and so I think part of the education of this, the history of this to our colleagues and our brothers, white brothers and sisters, is that we need to make sure that in schools these things are being taught, you know, at the young age. And I think that it needs to be really instilled in the youth that like this is actually the true history of America. You know, don't graze over it. And I know that it might be difficult as a society for us to grapple with the reality of how we got here, but you can't get to where America is now without all of those things that happened to Black people. You know, the country was built on slavery. We need to accept that and just move forward. And I think part of the problem with America is that people don't want to face the ugly reality of our history. They want to kind of graze over it. And I talked to a friend of mine before, and I was like, it feels like America has like push this story of equality and come here and the streets paved with gold, but in reality the streets were paved with the blood of slavery, and people need to accept that because the other narrative that's being sold is not as true, you know. And if you can't accept this true narrative, then you won't be able to move forward. Imagine doing something terrible to a friend, and every time the friend tells you that terrible thing that you did to them, and they're trying to reconcile it, you just say, oh, come on, man. Like, that was so long ago. You're like, but you shot my brother in the face. Like, why do you never want to talk about this? How are we going to move on when you keep avoiding this conversation? You know, it's really hard to just tell people to just move on and get along with this thing when it's been a really terrible history. And I think part of the problem is that for Black people to get into a better place, there has to be an acceptance of that. And I think people feel like that means that they're at fault. Like white people right now feel like I'm blaming you for it. I'm not really blaming you. I'm just saying this is the reality of the world we live in. This is what's happened, and we need to accept it so that we can actually fix the root causes, you know, of systemic racism. If you can't even agree that there's a problem, how are we going to be able to solve that? Anybody working in a company, if we can't agree that there's an issue here, how are we going to solve that? And speaking to microaggressions is just like, there are so many times where I feel that if you do something or say something, you feel like you're the angry Black person. And I had a situation personally in my life where I was at one of my companies and I had a coworker say the N-word to me, and they didn't direct it at me, but they were singing a song and they said the N-word, and then realized that I don't say the word myself, or I don't even know what they're assuming, and then turned to me and was like, oh, like Jay-Z's saying it, so like it's fine if I say it. And I'm like, dude, I don't say it myself. And the question for me has always with that situation been, if I'm telling you I don't say it, why do you have such a need to say it? I'm telling you, me, myself, I don't say it. What is your need to say it with me in the room? Are you trying to prove something? Does it feel like it's something that you've been stopped from having because in your whole life as a white person or a person that's lived in America, you've been able to do whatever you want, and this is like the untouchable fruit? You can't say the N-word and you need to say it in front of me just to see if I'm like cool with you saying it, like we're that cool, but that's not me, you know? And the thing that really was hurtful about that is I know that coworker is a good person. And I also know that if I wasn't in the room, they would not say that. They would not say that word, sing it or rap it if there was a boss in the room, if there was HR in the room. But they decided that because I was in the room, it was okay to try to test the water with saying that. And it was such a hurtful microaggression that it's one of the things I don't actually bring up too often, because I was like, it made me really have a weird relationship with that coworker, and I kind of distanced myself from there on, you know?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, Bilali. You know, you touched on a great point about the contradiction of saying, you know, get over slavery, but yet 9/11, we're never going to forget, right?
Exactly.
You know, that's the irony. Anyone else would like to comment?
just to dovetail kind of off what you were saying is, that's actually a perfect, opportunity for me. I'm always looking for opportunities to educate. I've done a lot of that, like in the past couple of weeks. Like I think, it's disappointing that the burden is on us. That's actually one of the things that I'm really pushing. Is like, hey, so as a white person, that should be your burden that you have to take on. Is you have to be aware of that, and you have to be able to like shut that down. We shouldn't have to police that. It's something we have to deal with. But I do think that's a good opportunity to educate someone and to shut them down. So like, yeah, that's not okay. Don't use that word. Don't ever use that word. It makes me uncomfortable. I guarantee it makes any other Black person around uncomfortable. So just don't do it. And that's just one of those things. Like I believe you can have a discussion now. I don't feel like you could have done this even a year ago, where you can actually just tell somebody like, no, that's not okay, dude. Like shut that down. I've since this has happened, I've had a few like conversations. Not they're not charged, but I just want to let people know. It's like, hey, so like just so you know, this is an issue and this is why. So I always make sure it's private or whatever, but I also make sure like, hey, I'm watching you and I'm keeping it to task. You need to like, if you really are an ally, you need to make this a priority. So
yeah, 100%.
Micaiah, Jonathan, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate actually hearing those stories about education in the workplace, because I'm not sure how to have those conversations, to be honest. Those are kind of uncomfortable and difficult conversations, but they're necessary. I just think when I think about this, it does start with our grade school education is what's really lacking right now. I'm a big fan of an organization called zenproject.org, Howard Zen, The People's History, which is really focused on education, telling the untold story. And I think that one of the things that we do have to recognize is that there is an uncomfortableness to this, because I think there's an illusion out there that the people who are at the top of their field, whether they're the top professor, the top, illustrator, I guess, or whatever, that they've gotten there just on the sheer grit of their intelligence and their hard work. And I think when you start telling the fuller story of American history and understand what some people have to do to get to where they are, you start to appreciate, you start to realize, or these people will start to realize, that it's not just them, it's just not their own great, intelligence and smarts that got them to where they are. There's a lot of privilege that goes along the way. And I think that can be very uncomfortable and unsettling in a lot of ways. And so I think trying to understand how do you deal with that in a way, especially in the workplace, where you're having to deal with somebody where, to kind of, some people are more amenable and a little bit more humble and willing to accept that kind of message, but I think, others may not be. And I'm not sure exactly, to be honest, how to have those kinds of conversations, but I think that we need to have more of those kind of conversations to make people a little bit more respectful of the privilege that they've had to get to where they are, particularly in the professional fields that they are, relative to other people that really, one person has to be an exceptional person, where the other person just kind of has to be average to get there based on the privilege that they've had.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing for me is that there are just so many other roadblocks just based off of your skin color or even your name. And one of the craziest things, there's statistics out there that, like, I don't know if this isn't completely accurate, but more often than not, people of color are not selected for jobs based off of their names, just based off of, if it sounds like you have an African-American sounding name in particular places, you will not be selected based off of your resume for certain positions because your name sounds too Black. And like, what does a Black name have to do? Imagine if we started not hiring people because their name was like Barry or something, or Timothy, like that. It would just be absurd. People would be like, that's crazy, but that happens. All these little micro like injustices happen to people of color, and these barriers build up over time. Over time, you have enough people just not being selected because of their name, enough people not being promoted because of their hair isn't right at the office or something, and people don't like them, or their culture. I had a friend that posted a link to a thing that said that in the workplace, they feel like diversity is like being invited to a party, but inclusion is them playing your music. And that resonated so well for me, because I feel like there is a lot of diversity and people are struggling, are striving to have diversity, but inclusion means that you're including these people in your boards. You're also including them in meetings when you guys are coming up with new stories or creative things that you're doing in your office, or building up new projects, you know? And sometimes I think that the diversity aspect is more often thought of, but then people just drop the ball. They're like, okay, we have some diversity. We've got like 20-30% diversity. That's it. We're good to go, right? The company looks good on the face to anybody that would question us. And the reality, I think this is something I could talk in the next question, but like the reality is that if your company was like 2% black or 2% people of color or diverse, then you have a white company, right? People don't want to say it in that way, but if you have 2% people of color in your company, then you're a white company. And the problem for me, the reason I get a little frustrated with this is because if you have like 4 or 5 people that start a company in America that are black or people of color, it's all of a sudden it's like a black company. But no one ever wants to say out loud that every other company in America is a white company. You know, they'll just say, oh, it's a company. It's a Fortune 500 company. But then you get like 4 black people together that start a company. It's like, oh, look at that urban company, that black company. And then it becomes like a stigma that gets toted around with the company. It's like, oh, well, I feel like that's an urban company that should be targeting urban demographics, when it should be able to target the whole country. It's just another company, but because if it's not white, it's not mainstream, you know? And that's I think a big problem in America.
Yeah, Bilali, you touched on something I'm sure is dear to Micaiah's heart about inclusion. And then one of the things that ACM SIGGRAPH and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee has really been honing in on is that inclusion piece. Because you're right, you know, being invited to the party and then being able to play your music and dance, that is a crucial piece and a very important piece. And Micaiah, before we go to the next question, would you like to touch on the inclusion piece that Bilali started talking about?
Sure. And so I know there are a lot of organizations that have diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and many of these efforts have been, kind of popping up even more recently. And I think it's not enough just to hire people, of color or women and people who are different. You have to create an environment that's going to invite them in and convince them to want to stay. Because the reality is, you can hire, 5,000 Black people, but if you're not going to listen to their ideas, if you're not going to, make them feel like they matter in the organization, and if you're not going to, create opportunities just like everyone else where they can, compete for promotions and things like that, they're not going to stay. And so I think that's why many times people do go out and, they might stay in corporate world for a couple of years, and then they, especially in the technology industry, they'll stay in corporate for a while, and then they decide, well, this is just not going to work. People are not going to listen to me. No one's going to accept my ideas. People feel uncomfortable, so let me go and start my own company. So there's many examples of that. But I think, inclusion is really key to helping to drive, the diversity within an organization and to help that diversity or those diverse backgrounds to thrive. So if you don't have policies in place that are going to promote inclusion within your organization, it makes no sense to have, diversity and inclusion as a focus within your organization. You really have to think about, how are you hiring people? What type of bias might there be in that interview process? Who's making the decision? How many people of color or how many women are in that decision-making panel when you're interviewing people? Do you have a fair process in place to even evaluate people? I've heard a lot of times, I've gone to companies where they say, oh, well, this person doesn't quite fit, or I don't know, there's just something about them that doesn't work. And that just doesn't fly. You need to have a valid reason for not wanting to hire or to hire someone. And if you can't articulate that based on a system that's in place, whether, it's certain qualities or, matching up to your company values, then that's usually a flag that there's some type of discrimination or bias in that process. And so I encourage all organizations to take a look at all of their process. You know, how are you hiring? Who's involved in the hiring process? Who's making decisions in terms of promotions? Who's making decisions in terms of providing opportunities for projects within your organization? But if those processes are not inclusive, or if they're not designed, including the ideas of people that they are going to impact, more than likely there is bias involved, and we need to reevaluate that. So just wanted to add that.
Well, thank you. Great point. So moving to the next question. So the main conference starts Monday. SIGGRAPH really attracts a lot of great artists and computer graphics professionals. What are your thoughts on how we can leverage their expertise in technology to educate and really show the experiences of marginalized people, not only in the U.S. but around the world, and starting with you, Everett?
That's a really great question. I think that there's a good part of this that's you have to do a little bit of research in terms of like reaching out. I think there are a lot of really great groups out there that are trying to kind of help signal boost and help advance the conversation. So I think SIGGRAPH reaching out, there's a lot of like great organizations. Like I'm thinking of like, Rise Up Animation or Diverse Tunes. There's a lot of these organizations, and kind of looking at them to kind of become partners or help like getting them involved so they can help advance this conversation and really become actively involved. I also think that because the thing is, if you're coming into a conference and say you're coming to show like a piece that you want something in the theater, I don't think that in your mind you're going to be, unless you're a person of color, like that you're going to be as concerned about like advancing the conversation. However, if you're doing even what this panel is doing, and you're bringing people and you're highlighting this conversation, I think that really helps, and it makes people more aware and like more like I've talked to many friends who said I did a panel very much like this with Netflix, and that helped them like, oh, it was really good hearing that. Like I see ways in which I can kind of help advance that conversation. A lot of it's like signal boosting. So, it starts with a little bit of awareness, I think, and kind of putting that list together. Who's having a conversation already? Who's already talking about this stuff? How can we invite them to become, partners or spokespeople with SIGGRAPH? I think that's one way that would be really helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated discussion.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Again, Everett, I apologize. I can't hear you, so I can't respond to what you said.
Man, yeah, I'd love it if they fix that. That would be great.
I'd like to throw out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, what he said was perfect. I think, just raising awareness and continue to have these conversations is really important. And I think without the conversations, people are not going to know that it's an important topic. So I think just having the conversations is really, the first step in keeping those conversations going. And so with a community this large, if everyone is having these conversations and they're taking that back to their organizations, I think it's going to help to, drive some meaningful action.
Yeah, one thing that I would want to throw out here just as an idea is, just because this is a SIGGRAPH conference, and this is not my field, but I'm really interested in how to bring and engage more people in the field of science. And I think that there's some interesting opportunities there to connect with the graphics community, storytelling. One of the things that hooked me into getting into computer science was electronic music, recording studios, things. And there's a lot of interesting technology, I think, that can bring people into science, when they start to think, really start to learn about what are the things the technology that goes into the tools that really are driving our lives today. And I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities really in stories to tell, to expose more people to kind of the compellingness of getting into some of these science fields, I think, in a way that hasn't always been there. And I think it was at least a powerful tool for me in terms of saying, maybe it's worth this, getting into programming a little bit more and learning some of the things that are needed to actually make some of this technology work.
Yeah, I think that was fantastic, and I think allowing people of color, I don't want to say allowing, but like I think we should be reaching out to people of color for the sciences and computer science industries and sectors, because I think it's really important. Like you don't want like all white people working on facial recognition software that the police will be using to track down criminals, right? Because there might be a skew or unconscious bias towards a certain kind of individual, if you guys know what I'm saying. I just feel like it's really important that we make sure that people that are computer scientists, people that are working artificial intelligence, people that are working in I don't know, any of these computer science software industries should have people of color and diversity, because it will help like mitigate those unconscious biases. Because a lot of people, that's the whole idea of a bias, is you don't know you have it. So even if people are well-intentioned, the ramifications of some of these software going wild and targeting wrong groups or disenfranchising wrong groups, it would be a very bad systemic problem if we start having technology that's being created with biases in it. And I'm sure it's already happened. I mean, there were stories of people in Kodak creating the camera film emulsion process and having it be skewed towards white skin. And so every time you'd see a black person that was photographed, their skin was like dark, contrasting. You basically couldn't read it, right? And that's what happens when these technologies are being created for one group. You imagine they're taking all the photos of just white people. The first time they use the photo and a black person's in it, they're like, oh, well, actually, it's not exposed properly for black skin. And that's an issue that could happen in technology without people even realizing. That could affect a lot of people. One of the things I also think is, we talked about storytelling a little bit, and I think it's really important for us to make sure that there are diverse storytellers, right? I think all of us here understand the importance of story, and we understand the importance of narratives and how they have the ability to paint the world that we live in. And I think that we should, like Hair Love was an incredible film. And why is that? One of the only animated films that we've seen won an Oscar for, that has been created by people of color. It's amazing, incredible story. And we should see more stories like that. And because those kinds of stories paint a diverse, rich image of people of color, Black people in America. And those are the things that can fight against these preconceptions, because then people are like, oh, wow, this is a beautiful story of a father and daughter, instead of a story of a black person, a black man in prison, which is, I feel like a lot of the times the image you see of black men in prison, you don't see them as nurturing fathers taking care of their kids, which is not a good thing, you know. And we have, as storytellers, as scientists, as artists, it's on us to make sure that we're championing these stories. And like one example was, I saw online that if you go on like TurboSquid, I don't know if you guys know, I use it a lot in computer graphics, but you can go on there and get 3D models of things. If you type in black man or black woman or African American man, like you'll find like 3 African American men or 3 African American women, and then the rest are just white men with dark hair, black hair or something, you know? And that's the problem. One thing I saw was there was an initiative for I think it was another computer graphics artist that won this grant, and she used the grant to create all of these models of black women with different black hair, and instead of just the one type of black hair that you were seeing on TurboSquid, because we have different hair and we have different textured hair, and it can be like an afro, it can be curly, you know, and it could be short, and because there's a lack of diversity, you're not seeing any of those TurboSquid models, and you're not seeing any of this rich diverse stories and narratives and pictures and images of people of color. And though that narrow story is kind of how people have a perspective of people of color and Black people in America. And so I think it's really important for us to focus on diversifying that story, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Bilali. Before we get to the last question, we had a lot of comments come in, and I wanted to let you address maybe one or two of those before we move to the last question. The first is from Jenny, and she asked, would nationwide laws around blind hiring selection or matching demographics help, or should it be left up to the companies?
In my opinion, I'm not sure that would help much. I think that it would actually, promote some bad behavior, because you might get the person into the organization, but like I said before, if the environment is not inclusive and people have this bias, they're going to find a way to make sure that those people don't stay within the organization. So I'm not sure that that would be as helpful. I think, education within the organization, training, helping people to realize the biases that they have, and putting in processes in place that can ensure that the process is fair and unbiased is going to help a lot more than just mandating that, you know, you use blind resumes or blind selection process. But I would love to hear what other folks think about that.
Yeah, I've got a great idea for that. Just hire Black recruiters. I mean, like that will help. You know, that's the simplest way to deal with the problem. I think a lot of the issues of inclusion, it's like, for example, in my industry, hire more Black development like executives. You'll get more Black shows. It's just that I try to leverage my position now. It's the first time I've been in a leadership position in my career. And I definitely try to use that to great effect to shine a spotlight. It's like, hey, so these are people that I've been working on for a long time that have never even got a shot. Oh, you don't know about this person? Yeah, the work is great. You need that sort of direct, when you have people of color who are in positions where they can actually make decisions, is very effective. Because number one, there's already there's a knowledge of the problem. Like, we all know what the problem is. And then there's also not only a willingness, but an excitement to actually address the problem. So I think that's the best way in my mind to handle it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with both. I don't think you really want to completely mandate. I'm all for incentivizing. So I don't think it needs to be a strict mandate, but I think it wouldn't be bad to incentivize companies, to be more diverse or to hire people of color, hire Black, brown people. That's where I'm more aligned with. I think, honestly, every regulation or every way you decide that you're trying to do good or something, there are always going to be consequences, intended or unintended, and so you need to be careful when you're doing things like mandating nationwide laws. And that's why I feel like sometimes incentivizing companies is a better way of doing it, because if they really want those incentives, they'll decide to diversify a little bit. But also, like you guys said, I think at the core of it, if you hire Black people or people of color into leadership positions, they also in turn will have that perspective and hire more people of color, and good people of color that are great at their jobs. I feel like sometimes companies, they're like, oh, we have a diversity issue, and they'll be like, okay, let's go out and find as many Black interns and Black administrative assistants as possible. What does that do to the bottom line of your company? Yeah, sure, on paper you see more people of color in your company, but that's not going to really change your company and the processes that your company goes through, and they're not really going to have a say in shaping the company and the culture. I
just want to add too, because you brought up an interesting point about having leaders, but also you mentioned previously about HR, and I think every company that I've worked at, when I look across HR, I would say probably 90% of HR, it's white women. So these are the people who are hiring at large companies, white women, and there's a fair amount of bias, I would imagine. So yeah, I think you make a good point. You know, we have to look at, you know, who's sourcing the talent, who's bringing the talent in, and then from the top, who are the leaders that are making the decisions. And so I think if we can create more of a mix of, you know, or a contribution of Black people who are leaders and making decisions, as well as people who are bringing or sourcing that talent, you know, that helps to create an opportunity for more, you know, people of color to come into the organization. And so I think we also need to look at, you know, how are we staffing, or how are companies staffing their HR departments.
And also, if you have the resources and capability, I'm all for Black people just starting their own companies. You know, you just start your own company, and there won't be as much bias if you're a person of color. If you can, obviously the resources are short, and it's difficult for a lot of Black people and people of color to be able to start their own companies, because we could go into how difficult it is for people to get bank loans and things like that, you know, and get the resources they need to start.
A lot of systemic issues.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of systemic issues. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. But I mean,
systemic issues.
You know, you get together, and if you can pull it off, that you won't have any bias in your company if it's 90% Black. You know, like that. I'm kind of all for that going that route as well. But yeah, obviously it's a difficult road.
Let me get to his next comment, because I'm interested in hearing the response for this also. It was initially targeted to Bilali. They were asking, can you comment on mentors that were important to your career and how you found your path in your field? So we can start with you, Bilali, and I'll be interested in hearing what other folks have to say also.
Yeah. Honestly, I've had a lot of great mentors. And the funny thing is, a lot of my mentors were older white men, because in the field that I work in visual effects and animation, there weren't that many like people of color that were leaders. And but they were fantastic. They pushed me, they challenged me, they accepted me for who I was and my personality. And part of it too was that I was willing to learn, and I was smart, and I leaned on them, and that worked out, and that has been great for me. I would say that I never really had any conversations with my mentors as far as what it felt like for me to be a Black person in animation or visual effects. Actually, I had one mentor that I did speak, probably one of my mentors I did have some of these conversations with, and we still talk about these things today, and he was a great help for me. But most of the other people that I had that mentored me, they were just interested in me pushing my career, and I could see that they genuinely cared for me, and they genuinely cared for my success, and my success also became their success. So I think, and I also personally, I try actively to seek out mentors. And I think that's one of the important things is, like, if you're working at a company, you want to try to see if whoever the guy is that you're looking up to, just start shadowing them a little bit, asking questions, and then try to see if you can, if they're good leaders at your company, they inherently will start to realize that they're kind of like mentoring you and teaching you. And I think it is really important to try to find mentors, but it can be tough, I think, as a person of color, trying to have maybe some conversations about about being a Black person and about your situation in the company. And so sometimes you can feel a little isolated. And I have felt that way in some of my companies. I have felt like I can't talk about what it feels like to be Black at my company. And sometimes you have microaggressions that are happening that I honestly am just like, I'll just swallow it and just focus on my work. And that's been kind of my motto throughout part of my career. And it's unfortunate. I wish there was like another Bilali, like when I was getting started, that I could be talking to and joking about and like getting some guidance and advice on things, you know, because that's all you really want sometimes. Yeah.
I totally agree. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've had some pretty amazing mentors. I've had 3 great mentors. Actually, 2 of those mentors were actually Mexican, and one of them was Black, or is Black, I should say. One of my first mentors I had was when I was actually in college. His name is Luis Contreras. I went to college in Columbia College in Chicago, and he really kind of helped instill in me like that kind of passion for storytelling. And I'm very grateful for that, because that passion is like what's been fueling me all these years. He kind of showed me like, hey, you have a love for this and a talent, like, and he really kind of helped pave the way for me. And just recently, I give big props to Jorge Gutierrez, because he was somebody who was actually inviting me to panels. Like, at this time, like a few years ago, I really wasn't making sort of any moves in my industry, but I wanted to. And he was the first person like, hey, so we're going to have this panel and we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about animation, and we're going to talk about minorities in animation. And I want you on that panel. And in just kind of watching him move and watching how he kind of like, he really advocated for me, and just seeing how he operated kind of gave me a lot of the confidence to kind of move the way I'm moving now. I think because he was a person of color, there's automatically like there's sort of understanding like I know what's up, I know what you're going through. But he also kind of gave me that confidence of like, hey, you know what, like take the conversation. If they're making you uncomfortable, let them know and tell them that this isn't right. Like, so yeah, it's been really amazing.
Yeah, apologize. I thought you was done.
No, it's all
I can't hear you. but unfortunately, I could talk to everyone for hours. But we're out of time now. The time went fast. I am truly thankful and appreciative that I was able to moderate such a distinguished panel. The conversation and the insights that everyone has given has been amazing. So thank you, and I wish you much success. And hopefully I can work with one of y'all in the future. So who knows?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much.